Welcome to the Bold Lounge podcast. My name is Lee Burgess, and I will be your host. If you're anything like me, you love hearing inspiring stories of people who have gone on bold journeys and made a positive impact in the world. This podcast is all about those kinds of stories. Every week, we'll hear from someone who has taken a leap or embarked on an extraordinary journey. In addition to hearing their stories, we'll also learn about their bold growth mindset that they use to make things happen. Whether they faced challenges or doubts along the way, they persisted and ultimately achieved their goals. These impactful stories will leave you feeling motivated and inspired to pursue your own bold journey. I believe everyone has a bold story waiting to be freed. Tune in and get ready to be inspired. Welcome to the Bold Lounge. Today I have Rebecca Love. She is an experienced nurse executive and the first nurse featured on TED.com and recognized as one of modern healthcare's most influential people in healthcare in 2022. She's the Chief Clinical Officer of IntelliCare, and I want to welcome you to the Bold Lounge.
Lee, thank you so much for having me.
So excited to jump into bold. We were talking just a bit ago, so excited to get the conversation going. Can you tell me what the definition of bold means for you?
So to me, bold is a definition in which you bet on yourself and your passion when almost all the odds are against you, or that you've heard so many no's, but something internal to you tells you to keep going in the face of that adversity and betting on yourself over betting on the status quo.
Yeah, I love this question, although it's the same question every episode. There's some similarities, but everyone has a different spin on it. So betting on yourself. So being able to say, I know me best. I am the one who's going to be making the moves moving forward or stepping in or stepping up, whatever it may be that you're doing. But your number one piece of your definition is really betting on yourself and your passion.
Yeah, I would think so, Lee. I don't think it's ever easy to do those, but I would
definitely
agree.
Not. It's definitely not. So we could get into that a little bit too. So when's the first time or one of the moments that you remember you actually living that definition?
The first time that I remember, it was a friend of mine I had a small startup at the time called hirenurses.com, and it was failing miserably from a financial perspective. I had a whole bunch of nurses who had joined, but making money was something that I had no idea how to do. And I had 3 little babies at home. I was working a full-time job. I was building this company independently. And a friend of mine said, Rebecca, you really need to go to a hackathon. And I remember showing up at this event, and it was held by one of the big hospitals in Boston. And I arrived, and there was people everywhere. The CEO of the hospital was there. The CEOs, all the healthcare startups, major organizations were all present. Doctors, engineers, physicians, scientists. Everybody was in that room besides one other nurse. And I remember thinking to myself, standing in that room, oh my gosh, I'm not supposed to be here. Like, this is where the decision makers are. This is where the influencers are. And in that moment, I was so certain I wasn't supposed to be there that I thought about leaving, because I knew that if people found out, or what I assumed was, if people found out that I was there as a nurse, I would be asked to leave, but nobody asked me to leave. So in that moment, I remember standing there feeling so uncertain, because you had to come back for 2 more days if I would return. And I decided that I had something of value to offer this hackathon. And that moment changed my life. That moment to decide to stay and to invest in this hackathon and participate in an innovation sprint with all of these brilliant individuals, and believe that there was something of value I could contribute, but also something of value I could take away. That was a moment that made me start to realize that getting uncomfortable and participating in things that perhaps you're not necessarily invited to, but creating that table and bringing your own chair, that changed my life. And I think a lot of nurses, if you in my sphere that start to go to hackathons, say hackathons changed their lives. For the first time in their life, what they did is they showed up somewhere that they knew where they were in the minority, but finally somebody heard their voice in a way that they had never been engaged with before. And that was, for me, the first time that I think I was truly, truly bold. Starting my own company was a big other step in that. Back in 2013 also was a big step. But I think when I faced that, walking into a room and having that immediate visceral response that I didn't belong here and choosing to stay, that was different than starting my own company.
Yeah. So just for everyone listening, a hackathon, and you can correct me here or add anything in, is really we have a problem to solve and we're going to bring the most brilliant minds around it to actually solve it in bold ways, innovative ways, creative ways, ways that's never been solved before. And it's such a big, hairy, audacious problem that we need as many minds as possible. Did I capture that correctly?
Beautifully said, Lee, beautifully.
Okay. So you were invited into the room because of your expertise, because of what you do, and because of your experience, but you still felt that you didn't belong potentially. And, imposter syndrome cranks up in my head when I hear that. I think that's part of it, but also it's part of when we get to a place and space in our life where we've never been before. For some reason, for me, like you get to a place or into a room and you feel like it wasn't really imposter syndrome, but it's nerve wracking. It's adrenaline provoking. It's, how did I get here kind of moment, kind of you almost see your life fast forward in some of these places that, you end up. So what made you stay? How did you talk yourself into, I do deserve to be here. I should stay. I'm not leaving. What made you stay?
I think to that point, this was the first event that I actually showed up and knew nobody in the room. And I think it really was the fact that nobody asked me specifically to leave, which I know that's crazy, right?
That's really, yeah. I mean, I wrote that down and I think no one asked me to leave. So I realized I had value.
Yeah, it was sort of like my response. So I don't know about you, Lee, but when I was a floor nurse, right, there were so many times I was in conversations and you were just ignored in those conversations. Your input did not matter, right? If the surgeons were talking, the physicians were talking, the administrators were talking, it did not matter what the nurse often said. Yeah. It would never be heard, right? So going to this hackathon and having conversations, because the first night, to your point, is people just walk around and talk about problems, right? And I realized that people were listening to what I had to say as a prospective nurse. So just by being heard in that moment, or people carving out time to listen to me, suddenly validated something in myself that as a nurse, I had very rarely had a positive feedback loop from by people like them in the clinical setting. Mm-hmm. So sitting at this event external to it and talking with doctors about the state of healthcare and certain things like this, and being engaged with in a positive way and asked for my feedback, suddenly that entire experience of engagement changed the way in which I felt that I could participate. And I think that is an important level that so many of us, especially probably on your podcast, feel, is there comes a moment when you believe in yourself, but sometimes you need that one other person to see and hear you to believe that you can do it. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was part of that experience when I was at that hackathon, that first night, that people were like, that's really interesting. Or, that's a very good point. Things that I had very rarely had feedback on when I was a floor nurse.
Yeah. I don't know about you. I always remember those first. I remember my first contract when I started my consulting. I remember my first sale when I did the bold retreat, so like the first is, it's a validation that you deserve it, but it's this validation of like my idea was a good idea. My thought was a good one. I'm going in the right direction. I think everything's a work in progress. So I think, it's just the beginning of something when those things happen. But, one of the things you said is like you engaged your voice, in those, you were heard by others and you had the plus one kind of validate your ideas, your thoughts, well, that's a good thing to think about. And when you're an innovative, when you're entrepreneur, when you're in kind of the field of nursing, particularly where you are the voice of the patient and the family and the loved ones, and not to say that doctors and anyone else, or administrators like I was, aren't, but I mean, you are right there. You are you are holding hands with the patient. It's a different place of fight or advocation or kind of, making sure that the, things get heard. And sometimes as a nurse and in that field, like it feels like you don't get heard. So when you had this hackathon, this moment, what did that lead to? Did it open up the box of even more, being heard, more putting yourself
being more bold? 100%. Yeah. The experience changed my life so much that I was determined there had to be a nurse hackathon in the country. And I started calling nursing schools across the country because I kept thinking to myself, if nurses are part of these, we could actually solve the problems that were driving us crazy at the bedside, really move the needle for patients. That's the voice that always was missing from really creating that solution. And so I remember, and I joke with people that I'm like 185 phone calls later, suddenly somebody picked up and at the time was Dr. Nancy Hanrahan, who was the dean of Northeastern School of Nursing. And I told her the story of that hackathon and said, you should host a hackathon because I believed so intrinsically that nurses could transform the future of healthcare if they were involved in innovation around the problems that we were hacking over, right? And she said, you know what, I'm going to host a conference on innovation entrepreneurship. Why don't you run a hackathon? And this was back in 2015 when nobody talked about innovation in nursing. You look at research, nobody talked about it. And we started to build to this event in 2016. And to be honest, there was a lot of hesitancy that the immediate response was, no, nurses follow protocol. They follow process. They don't question the status quo, that because if they do, patients die, right? So they should not be doing this. But 2 weeks before the event was sold out. Every major hospital in Boston was sending attendees. The organizations like Deloitte, Microsoft, J&J were flying people in to understand what this was. And we launched the first ever nurse innovation program in the country out of Northeastern that went on to have huge success. We changed the way in which nurses saw themselves and started a movement in nursing that I think has only gained steam. And that was with me and one computer and some support to host some events, right? It's sort of just like what you did, Lee, right? Like you just put a stake in the ground and you start building backwards from that. And the truth is if you're going in that right direction. And one thing that you said that, you know, sort of it gives you validation of things you deserved. I think it's just sort of validation for me of that your idea is accepted, right? You're finally accepted. Like what you were thinking about is an accepted way of doing things. So the world changed for me in that perspective. And because of that, I was given the freedom, to your point, to be creative and put together events and throw spaghetti at the wall and see what stuck and what didn't and pivot. And then J&J came and talked to us and changed their entire 15-year campaign of thanking nurses to now recognizing nurse innovation as the center of their initiative going forward in 2017. We started to change things. And I think when you believe so passionately, and this is where being bold for me has always run into a juxtapose in myself internally, which is I'm very passionate about moving the needle forward and helping nurses and elevate their profession. And where I lack that boldness sometimes is betting on myself to be able to do that independent of a structure or of a business or of a company hiring, right? And so it's interesting because if you give me a challenge to solve for nursing today or a year ago, I will take that on and run with it. Like I built that movement of nurse innovation. We spun it out to a national, international nonprofit called SANCL. I turned that over to be run over in December to a wonderful person out of Mass General. And then I started a new commission to take on reimbursement models in nursing, the first commission for nurse reimbursement to get nurses out of the room rate so that they can be a billable service. We launched that in May. I have 1,300 volunteers. We're operational against this. I'm having meetings with congressmen left and right? Like we're going to change what nurses have not been able to change in 100 years. I know that intuitively. Mm-hmm. But being bold for me in my profession has always been about advancing the profession of nursing. It's been starting a job board to elevate nurses so that they could pick their future. It was about starting the nurse innovation movement in hackathons and then building and scaling that to a universal one. It's always been about the profession for me. And this is just sort of a point of clarification, is trying to find out how you can bring those together and meld them so you can do what you love, follow your passions. And sometimes you can move the needle to do that for societal good. And then there's others that can do that for personal good. I think I've been lucky in my life that I have always had a career alongside the passions of the nonprofits that I build and scale. But I think that there's a lot to be said about those individuals like yourself who totally fly the coop and bet on themselves to start a business without that, life vest, right? Which is always having that job. And I give people a lot of credit who go out and do that fully, because if you do it fully, the amount of energy you put into things is the amount of energy that you're going to get back. It's not going to be easy. But if it's easy, you know that it's not going to, a big risk yields bigger rewards. That's how it measures out. So,
yeah. So one of the things you said is you're going to make an impact on reimbursement. You've already made an impact, with regard to innovation in the program that now lives on even after you've left, which is also leaving a legacy. So one of the things I just want to point out is you already are making a difference, in reimbursement, just by making people aware that it's a problem. And yeah, I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to talk about it. And I'm going to keep talking about it until we start to work to fix it. And this could be in any industry, any place. But I think just that alone is bold. And I think sometimes, people think about it's this huge, big moment. When I started my business and left the corporate world. It can be, what I would call quieter moments where we're just talking about it, but I'm not going to have a quiet voice about it, right? I'm going to keep at it. So just want to point out, you are already making a difference in that. And when you talk about moving the needle, one of the other things you said is like personally or professionally. So how do you think one feeds the other? When you say, I'm going to try, I'm going to learn, I'm going to reach out, I'm going to take a step, they all don't have to be, leaps. What do you think keeps people from moving that needle for themselves personally or professionally?
So I think financial pressures and fear are the biggest reason people don't take that leap. And family pressure sometimes, right? I think I talk to a lot of women, I'm sure you do too, who say, I have this great idea, but my husband says I need to either replace my income as soon as I leave. And there is this fear that you're not going to be able to do that, fear of failure. But sometimes I also wonder, I heard something the other day that was not so much fear of failure, but fear of success, right? They actually fear the success more than failing in and of itself, which is crazy because I don't think they think that they can achieve that success. So why do people not take that? I think is that fear, but also it's naturally inclined in our society that we all want some level of certainty, right? And a job is certain. We know that if we go to work, that we can make every 2 weeks, we'll have a paycheck. Now, what many of us are reeling in today's changing market, right, is that you're just a commodity to any business, right? You can be replaced at any point in time. So why not bet on yourself is sort of the ways that I've started to think about those things. For me, why I've always had something external to my job is because I don't think the job has ever completed that passion for me, right? I've always had a job, but then I always build these massive movements external to it because, to what you've said before, innovators and change makers see problems that they want to solve. And if you're doing it for society, usually there isn't a profit behind it, right? Saving nursing to save the profession. Right now, there is no remodel that makes money on that. So you're going to have to do it because you believe in it, because it's part of who you are going to be. And I think the same applies to a business too, is that you see a problem that you can solve and you can scale it, but you doubt that you can do it because you haven't ever had that positive reinforcement in your life before to say, hey, I believe in you. Like, you got this, you can do that.
Or you've been in a structure, like for me, I didn't even realize I was so entrepreneurial, which now looking back, I realize is what got me in trouble in certain places or spaces that I worked, yes. Right? Because I was always the why not? Yes, we can. And sure, why does that have to be that way? We can change it. There was a whole lot of this is how we've always done it. And not at every organization I worked at, but certainly in moments that would happen, or we're too big, or we can't do that just for this place. So I think that's the piece, is like sometimes we don't even know we have it in us until we actually pause. And like my big pause was leaving. It almost felt like little lights just lit up all over my brain of like, wow, you could do this and you could do this and you could do this. And I think it was me kind of taking time to then filter, what can I really do? And for a little bit of time, wasn't sure I was even coming back to healthcare. I was that burnt out, that much of a push had been done, for me to like go, I just don't know if that's the world I'm going to go into.
But the universe has a weird way. And I love what you're saying, because I think I've never jumped without a parachute, right? I've always had a full-time job, built an etc., built one company, sold one company, built a nonprofit, in addition, turned that over, started another one, always had a full-time job because that's what I've been told to do. We worked so hard. And I always look at people, and I encourage a lot of nurses specifically who want to start their own business. I said, think of all of the energy that you spend, that you move that needle with every day. And if you had all of those extra hours a day to actually focus on where your passion would be, the reality is how would it fail? Like, you're not going to let it, right? And I think that being bold in today's world, and I'm going to speak to women specifically, is there's biases built into the business world. And I think the reality is that the world is not still created equal for men and women. Access to capital is different. Women have to present themselves differently in certain situations than men. And I think that there is still this thing that we as women don't look for more permission, as opposed to saying, there's a Forbes right now is having all these 200 great entrepreneurs. And there was a woman in there who said, men are measured on their potential, women are measured on what they produced. It's a very different world. And so to take that leap of faith means not only do you have to overcome your own self-doubt, you sort of have to overcome society's opinions of what women have been capable of, which is crazy because we know that in this world, where would our society be without the impact that women have made to it? So that's a whole nother topic for, I'm sure, another day, but it's one of those things that I want us to recognize, especially if it's women listening to us out there right now, that you can do this. And historically we have, but we should recognize that there's a lot of external feedback that comes to us that is false, and it is a wrong narrative. And it's going to take many of us being successful to change that narrative on a global scale. So I applaud every single woman who ever bets on themselves and goes out, because what you're doing is you're standing on the shoulders of what your grandmother's generation accomplished, what your mother's generation accomplished, and then what we as a generation can accomplish for the next generation of women who are coming in advance of us. And to me, there is no more purposeful, bold mission than what we could do for the next generation of women.
Right. I see the book, The Bold Bet.
Oh, there we go.
Tackling your fear, understanding your finances, and using your family as an advantage. I mean, because your family, usually if they're doubting you, and they're thinking, they just want to protect you. They want to make sure you're okay. Exactly. They want to make sure we're okay, So yeah, the 3 F's, fear, family, and finance. And so I do think those pop up quite a bit for a lot of women wanting to try or think about. But I always say to begin. Start small, write it down. Yes. If you write it down, as simple as this sounds, and I'm sure people are tired of me saying those two things, but literally that is you launching your next level, your next entrepreneur endeavor. It is you launching your thought process to know that the only permission you have to give is permission to yourself to even think about it. And for some reason that happens. And it's always like when you're external looking or talking with someone and they're talking about those types of things, it's just like you want to encourage it so much, but you realize there's only so much someone outside can do, and you have to actually make that step yourself. So write it down, think about it, and begin. And I think thinking about that, you just talked about kind of just the biases and things that exist. So it's a big thing to do. It's a big thing we have to do as women as we think about giving ourselves permission to explore and to go forward. So when you're thinking about everyone that's listening and they want to follow their passion, they want to bet on themselves, they want to, realize that they are not going to be disinvited from the room that they enter. What advice, what guidance would you give them just to start, just to get that in motion?
So Lee, if these women are out there, and I think sometimes the hardest thing is that you actually have a million ideas rolling in your head. And I think, for one, I want you to know that that's natural. But I want you to know, one, that is a great thing. And two, what Lee said is the next thing, write them all down. And the truth is, one is going to come to you. You don't have to have the whole idea baked. And I think this is where people get lost. What I often say to people is just get me an MVP or get me one event and build back from it. If you're going to start your own consulting one and you want to do a conference, put a date of a conference and ground and start building to it. You want to run a holistic practice, call a hotel, book a hotel with a couple of September 14th through the 16th and be like, I'm going to organize a group of women and I'm going to get there. But I often say the reality is that you just have to get started. And that's going to be the hardest thing to do for anybody. You don't have to have all the details done. That's what gets in our way. Perfect often gets in the way of just being good. I want you to, as Lee said, do something small. If that's simply having a group of women over to your house to talk about the idea, if that's simply saying I'm buying one house to try to remodel or an apartment or something and I need to do this, whatever that is, just get started. I was a hospice nurse practitioner. And you know what I think motivates me, or what I think about too, is that people there, when they're dying, it's never like, I wish I spent more time at work or this. It was always the things that they had never done. I wish I had tried this. Mm-hmm. Because they realized life is going to work out. It really does work out. It really does work out. When you're never going to get it, you're never going to regret trying. It may not work out the way that you anticipated. It
might be even better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's going to be much better. Like what happened with so many people I know, it's always better actually. But you know what? You do regret the things you did not try at the end of life because you were too scared to do it, or you were too worried what your neighbors thought. And people that are never going to make a difference in your life, you let them determine your passions. Don't let that happen.
I love
Don't
that.
let that.
Yeah, I love that. Don't let not trying be one of your regrets. And I think it's so important for people to realize, and I say this a lot, but sometimes better is good. Like, could your situation, could your, exploration of what you think you want to do be better? Could you try a little harder? And what I mean by that is sometimes people think like the next step has to be the step, the place where I land. And it doesn't, it could just be a step. It could be, like, oh, that's not the job I want because I want that job. And I remember telling someone, well, like maybe it's a step to that. And maybe you learn new skills or you meet new people or, you get exposed to things. Oh, that's below me, or it's not, it's like a step back. And, I know, from a title perspective and those type of things, it's very important, but sometimes the title isn't what the experience is about or what you're going to gain. So just people understanding that sometimes better is good. Do you have more alignment in your personal and professional life if you take that job or make that change? Do you have more time to think about what your next steps are because you change this job or go try this thing out? Do you agree with that sometimes better is good?
I 100% agree. And that's the only way that, honestly, life moves forwards anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There's very rarely everything that transforms overnight. And we may think like Uber, and we may think like Twitter or whatever. Those took decades to build to where they are, to be so transformative. So they started with something simple and they grew from there. And that is exactly it. Just making something better is the right direction to moving society and your life forward. And anything that's better than the day before is the way to move. So I love that.
And I think that's really at the heart of the hackathon too. It's like, we may not solve the problem, but we're going to get at it and we're going to incrementally take pieces of it, dissect it. And by making those pieces better, you help the whole and you start to advance the problem as a whole and figuring it out. So I think that's important for people, dear. And you've said it a couple times, but it is not always, the answer. It is not the thing, but it's moving in the direction. Put your stake in the ground, work towards it, figure it out. And I think that's the other thing is once you put it out there, once you write it down and you start working at it every single day. So dreams don't take a day off. So like, I really think it's important for people to realize that, because if you do that, it will be very hard for you not to be successful, for you not to make progress. And I think it's just important to realize that. So bet on yourself. I think that is really the theme of this. And the bold bet really is really thinking about it and not limiting yourself. Oh, I'm a nurse or I'm an administrator. Like, you're an entrepreneur, most likely in there. I think maybe it's in everyone. And we just haven't let it out or freed it or let it have the opportunity to breathe. I am so excited for people to learn more about you, what you do. All the information about Rebecca is in the episode notes. Thank you so much for being on the Bold Lounge.
Lee, thank you so much for having me. And to everybody who's trying to be bold and live their lives, just get started.
Thank you for listening to the Bold Lounge podcast. Through the continuum of bold stories, vulnerability to taking a leap, you will meet more extraordinary people making a positive impact for others through their unique and important story. By highlighting these stories, we hope to inspire others and share the journey of those with a bold mindset. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast and look forward to sharing the next bold journey with you.